A promising college student, brutally murdered in her apartment.
56 separate wounds in her face, neck area, on her hands and arms. There was blood everywhere. This was a crime referred to as overkill.
People immediately thought, is there a sexual predator out there?
A vicious crime that takes investigators into an underground, drug-fueled world.
The rave scene was secretive because I think secretive by its nature is cool.
As they hunt a twisted killer hiding in plain sight. Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, a picturesque Canadian college town with a split personality.
The city has an east side and a west side, and it's separated by the river. The east side is whiter and richer, and the west side is where most of the violent crime occurred. If you wanted to find trouble or make trouble, you went to the west side.
But Saskatoon's east side is a safe and vibrant community.
Big university population, big sort of white-collar neighborhood, older houses that had been restored. That's where you would want to go if you had company in town and you wanted to take them out someplace and impress them with the city. Nice view of the river, nice walking area, a nice place to be.
One Sunday afternoon, East Side student Leanne Rutten is startled by a knock on her door.
The residence on 10th Street had a number of people living in it. It was divided between an upstairs suite and a downstairs suite.
Something's happened to Jamie. There's blood everywhere. She's been stabbed. Just call 911.
It's one of the tenants from downstairs. He looks rather disheveled, like he's been out all night. He's clearly upset and afraid. So she goes downstairs with this tenant. And she sees the female victim lying on the floor and blood all over the place. A scene of unbelievable violence.
Investigators immediately pronounce the young victim dead.
As the authorities first arrive on the scene, which included both police officers and paramedics, they were met, of course, by a very brutal scene. There was blood everywhere. There was blood spatter on the table, on the magazines. There was some blood spatter on the television set. She had a number of wounds about her body, in her face, neck area, on her hands and arms. She was completely soaked in blood.
The victim is 20-year-old Jamie Wheeler, a sophomore at the University of Saskatchewan.
Jamie worked in a restaurant and she went to school. She was a full-time university student who took her studies very seriously. So on one hand, she would like to go out and socialize, but on the other hand, she was also quite responsible. You know, she paid her rent, she went to school, tried to keep normal hours.
There's no sign of forced entry in the apartment, so right off the bat, police have to consider the possibility that whoever committed this heinous crime was invited in.
There were swabs taken from a couple of sets of doors. There was also blood found on her jacket, and there was, in fact, a pubic hair stuck on her arm. And all of these exhibits were sent off to the lab.
But the most telling clue left by the killer is the savagery of the assault itself.
Ms. Wheeler had 56 separate wounds, described as incised or stabbed wounds. The cause of death was determined by the pathologist to be essentially a loss of blood. This was a crime referred to as overkill, the situation where someone is at a high emotional, distressed state, resulting from either anger or possibly sexual motivation.
When you look at the factors in this case, we have a pubic hair. We also had a suggestion that maybe her sweatpants were loosened, and a very attractive woman. One can't help but wonder if the motivation was sexual.
But closer examination shows no sign of rape. Yet the brutality of the attack and the absence of forced entry both point to a crime fueled by a very personal rage. So investigators start questioning the people closest to Jamie. Since Jamie was not in a relationship, first on that list is the person who found the body, Jamie's roommate and friend.
The young man who lived in the house with Jamie Wheeler was named Dave Parent. He didn't really have a job that anybody knew of at the time.
Dave tells police the last time he saw Jamie alive was the evening before. It's Saturday night, and Jamie is settled for the evening.
So you sure you don't want to come to this party with us, Jamie?
Yeah, I really need to study, I'm sorry.
And the night that she was killed, David Parent was going out to a rave and had asked Jamie to come, but she had homework to do. So she bagged off and stayed home.
Okay, sure.
And it was unusual for neither one of them. He didn't think that was odd.
Dave and his friends head out just after 11 p.m., leaving Jamie home alone. Dave parties for several hours, high on more than music. Nobody has any idea when he left the rave. He claims he didn't return to the apartment he shares with Jamie until the next afternoon. The phone isn't the only thing that's been taken.
The initial stages of the investigation, Dave was able to identify some articles missing from the home. There was a certain type of Discman that he had given Jamie as payment for rent.
Dave adds CDs and a folding knife usually left on the living room table to the list of stolen items, and agrees to come down to the station the next day for a more detailed interview. With no time to waste, officers get busy canvassing the neighborhood.
As the details came out about the murder of Jamie Wheeler, it shook up everybody because it was a very uncharacteristic murder for Saskatoon.
We still aren't being told how the 20-year-old woman died, but word of her killing has spread.
At 6 p.m. that evening, Jamie's mother gets a frantic call from her sons in her hometown of Nipawin, 3 hours from Saskatoon.
The boys were watching TV and they heard on the news that there was a young lady's body found in a basement suite just off Broadway in Saskatoon. And they recognized Jamie's house, so they phoned me down at the Legion because I was there for a meeting. I tried phoning the house and there was no answer. It was a busy signal.
With a knot in her stomach, Jamie's mother returns to the family home.
We sat here at home waiting and waiting, and about 7 o'clock, a cop vehicle came to the house. The lady from victim service came in and with the cops and informed us that Jamie had passed away last night. We just didn't know what to say or do.
The loss is just too overwhelming. Roberta and Darren Wheeler's only daughter, Jamie, was born on June 1st, 1979.
Jamie was a middle child. She has an older brother, Darren, and a younger brother, Curtis. We noticed from a very young age, about 3, 4, that she was very independent. When she made her mind up about something, that's what Jamie was going to do, and you had a heck of a time changing her mind. Jamie was a very quiet, shy girl, but she was always curious and wanted to know what was going on. Very smart in school.
After graduating from high school in 1997, she studied psychology at the University of Saskatchewan.
That didn't surprise us because we knew Jamie wanted to know why people ticked. She belonged very well with people. I haven't come across anybody who really didn't like it. You always want answers. You want to know who did it and why they did it.
But answers won't come easy in this murder mystery. Detectives head to the restaurant where Jamie worked to question the staff.
She was described as a very quiet, nice person. Her co-workers were very much in shock over what happened to her. Jamie went to work that morning at 9 o'clock. She worked her normal shift, 9 to 5, as a line cook at 𝐂𝐥𝐸's restaurant. She got a ride home at the end of her day with a co-worker, arriving home about 5 o'clock in the evening.
Then one co-worker reveals something startling. Jamie had been complaining about her roommate Dave, and it wasn't the first time.
I think it was, on the surface, a pretty typical relationship, but they had some issues. He wasn't always timely in paying his rent. She wasn't particularly comfortable with the type of people he brought over. He gave off a fundamental sketchiness, but it wasn't bad enough to break up the living arrangement.
The story turns the glare of police suspicion right back on Jamie's roommate Dave. The next day in the interrogation room, detectives make him go through his story again, pressing him for more exact details.
And you found her in this condition, or was she still alive when you got home?
Police are looking for inconsistencies, but Dave doesn't slip up.
Investigators asked him about his possible involvement in the crime, asked him whether he was aware if Miss Wheeler had any known enemies. He, of course, indicated that he was not involved in the crime. He was not aware of any enemies that Jamie Wheeler had.
When the detectives ask Dave if he has any enemies, his answers become vague and confusing.
Okay, well, when I came back from the rave...
He starts to sweat. He's clearly hiding something, and police know it. Is the anxious roommate hiding a dark secret? Could this be the monster who slaughtered Jamie Wheeler? University of Saskatchewan student Jamie Wheeler is found stabbed to death in her East End apartment. With no signs of forced entry, police think her killer is someone she knew, and they're taking a hard look at her roommate, Dave Perron. But they've got nothing to prove their suspicions and are forced to let him go for now, while they hunt for solid evidence.
Dave had provided information leading us to believe that there was some articles stolen. The Vista programmable telephone was taken, and a Panasonic Shockwave Discman was missing. And that led us to believe that these articles may be showing up at pawn shops. So an investigation started to look at pawn records.
In Saskatoon at the time, there was a procedure whereby all pawn shops in the city had to report to the police all items taken on pawn.
The police looked at probably thousands of pawn records.
Unfortunately, it was a difficult process.
But even after digging through piles of receipts, investigators come up empty.
In any case like this, you hope for a significant lead very early that will give you a direction that you can follow. Unfortunately, in this case, we never came up with any stolen property that had been pawned off.
With a killer on the loose and no answers coming from the authorities, fear and speculation swirl through Saskatoon.
People were talking incessantly about this, partly because just of Jamie herself, a 20-year-old university student from a small town. It could be anybody's daughter or sister or girlfriend.
Then, a few weeks after the murder, the forensics lab reports a major break. In the blood, and from the pubic hair recovered from the crime scene, they discovered another distinct DNA profile mixed in with Jamie's.
They determined that the contributor was a male individual. It was quickly concluded that that person was likely the murderer.
Saskatoon authorities have the killer's genetic identity. Now to find a match. Starting with the national database of known felons.
There was no person with that DNA profile in the national database, and so the profile was labeled at that time unknown male 1.
Authorities have a pretty good idea who to test first. Roommate Dave Perron. But they need his consent and doubt he'll give it willingly. So they try a different angle to get him to cooperate.
The police had searched the backyard at the residence and there found a bag that contained some drugs.
We were looking through your backyard and we ran into this. Now that looks a little bit more than for personal use. Is this yours?
Perron seems to panic and threatened with drug charges, decides it's time to come clean.
Dave eventually admits to the police that he is a small-time drug dealer.
When he continues to insist that he had nothing to do with Jamie's murder, police ask if he'll back it up by providing a DNA sample. Detectives are shocked by the result. Prime suspect Dave Perron is not the killer.
DNA does not match.
But could it have been one of his clients?
We knew that we had to meet with people that knew Dave. There might have been people that had unfinished business with Dave. We needed to identify those and interview them. But without Dave's total cooperation, we had no access to finding out who those people were.
With drug possession and distribution charges still on the table, Dave agrees to actively help the investigation and starts naming names.
He has lots of people coming in and out of the suite, probably up to 100 people, and people with whom he had connections.
Historically, the city's drug trade has been run by the Hells Angels, Native gangs, or Asian gangs, and there's not a lot of layers between them and the street. So if you're any sort of active drug dealer, you're going to run into scary people in a hurry.
The top contender on Dave's list, Dominick H.
Dominick H. was known to police. He was known as being a small-time enforcer in certain drug circles.
Perron tells police that he did business with Dominick H. The two even smoked pot together at Dave and Jamie's apartment. But recently, there'd been some trouble between them.
Investigators knew of Dommy's reputation. They knew that he had existing warrants out for him. If he was involved, they didn't want to spook him and have him leave Saskatoon. So they decided that they would approach the situation investigating him with caution.
But first, investigators will have to find him.
They tried to track him down to his last known address. They had found out that he had moved. They started to do more investigation on him, and it appears that he was moving every 3 to 4 days, going to different addresses, which led police to believe that he was either hiding from someone or something.
Police finally have Dominick H. in their sights and start watching him around the clock.
Investigators are pretty sure that he was not going to cooperate with the investigation and would not provide DNA. So they determined that we would go directly to obtaining cast-off DNA, which is some article that he's touched and he's used and he's discarded.
If an individual uses an object and discards that object, it becomes garbage. The police are entitled to collect that item. There's no privacy right any longer to that item because it's been discarded, and the police are entitled to have that item looked at and DNA collected from that item.
DNA does not lie. If that was a positive match, that means this is the person that we are looking for, and we would have to move him from a person of interest to a suspect.
As you can see,
It's another strikeout. Dominick H. isn't a match to Jamie's killer. Dominick H. is very bad news, but he didn't kill Jamie Wheeler. Back to the drawing board. Detectives return to their original theory. The killer is someone from Jamie's own social circle. Someone close. As they look more deeply into her life, they uncover a secret, drug-fueled world that takes the investigation in a sinister new direction. With the prime suspects in Jamie Wheeler's murder cleared by DNA evidence, the Saskatoon police now follow a different trail, led by the victim herself and her secret party life.
As Jamie was growing up, she was quiet and shy. When she moved to Saskatoon, she got involved with the rave scene in Saskatoon. She'd go to dances. Jamie liked to watch people dance and then join in later.
The rave scene, an edgy underground subculture. It let Jamie Wheeler express herself in a way she hadn't done in high school.
The rave scene in Saskatoon at the time was just starting to become part of the wider consciousness in the city. These were dance parties, really. Different generations have called them different things. The rave scene was sort of secretive because I think secretive by its nature is cool. It felt very exclusive. And they didn't want to attract the attention of the police because we knew that drug use was fairly open there.
The drugs of choice were ecstasy and cocaine, which keep energy levels high for the all-night dancing, but not for Jamie.
It didn't seem like she was really into the drug scenes. It seems that her drug use was pretty casual and maybe even limited to marijuana.
She went to the raves to socialize and to dance, not to do drugs.
Investigators now pursue the theory that somewhere in this underground community, a killer is lurking. But the anonymous world of ravers makes it near impossible to track suspects down.
The rave scene, it was filled with people that used nicknames. They would post things on websites, they would attend raves themselves, but they wouldn't use their real names. They were known as smooches, landmen, hack, chops, and it really created a problem for investigators to find out who these people actually were.
Once more, 𝙀𝙫𝙚𝙀 rises to the occasion, offering to be the investigators' unofficial guide into this underground subculture.
He was one of those guys that was as big as life in the dance scene. He had a nickname within the rave scene called Teletubby Dave. And he was known, he was somewhat of a celebrity.
With Dave's insider knowledge, investigators are able to put real names to the ravers, and the list of potential suspects grows exponentially.
Police spent thousands of man-hours investigating this case, especially with respect to tracking down individuals and attempting to obtain DNA samples. There were a number of individuals who were asked to provide consent samples, who did. There were a lot of people who didn't. And as a result, many man-hours were spent in surveilling those individuals or in some manner attempting to collect cast-off materials from which to collect DNA.
Samples are rushed to the lab, and as the suspect list is whittled down, one name stays front and center.
Through the rave scene, a particular individual kept on coming up. He went by the nickname of Hippie. Hippie was best described as being a bit sketchy. People within the rave circle said that he was an unscrupulous drug dealer. He was known to rip off people, selling drugs and buying drugs, and he owed people a lot of money.
But Hippie's nowhere to be found on Saskatoon's late-night party scene.
Hippie left Saskatoon shortly after the homicide of Jamie Wheeler, which really raised the suspicions of people within the rave circle. They followed him through a series of phone calls to BC in Vancouver, Nelson, BC, and Grand Forks. And through those contacts, they were able to secure a phone number that gave them direct access to interviewing Hippie over the telephone.
Recording devices are running as senior officers dial the number.
Hello?
They asked him a series of questions about Jamie Wheeler, 𝙀𝙁𝙀, the rave scene in 521 10th Street, Saskatoon.
No, sorry.
He denied ever meeting Jamie, he denied knowing 𝙀𝙁𝙀, and he denied ever being at 521.
But his insistence only fuels investigators' suspicions.
Once he denied knowing anything about this, investigators thought we had caught him in a lie, and we contacted 𝙀𝙁𝙀 to verify some information.
I know Hippie.
He told investigators that if he said he had never dealt with 𝙀𝙁𝙀 and never been to 521 and didn't know Jamie, he was lying.
Take your time. Yeah. Bye.
Investigators were able to determine that Hippie was actually in North Bay, Ontario. As a result, they contacted North Bay Police and arrangements were made to have Hippie put under surveillance and DNA collected.
But the suspect stays one step ahead of the law, giving Ontario investigators the slip. Working overtime, they're able to pick up Hippie's trail again. He's covered 200 miles and is now just a couple hours outside of Toronto.
Hey, dispatch, Officer Ellis. I have a visual on our suspect.
But just when it seems they have Hippie in their sights, he slips out from their dragnet once again. The next time Hippie surfaces, it's an astonishing 3,000 miles away in the subarctic town of Whitehorse, Yukon.
Considering how elusive 𝐻𝐸 was, we contacted the RCMP Forensic Laboratory in Regina and asked for a contingency plan on how to eliminate 𝐻𝐸 as unknown male number 1. The lab suggested that if we got DNA from a family member, we may be able to use that to eliminate 𝐻𝐸 as a person of interest or confirm him as a suspect.
Ontario police track down a relative of 𝐻𝐸's and acquire a DNA sample for testing. Confident he's about to have his killer locked up at last, Sergeant Wiley is about to board a plane for Whitehorse when he gets his call from the lab.
We were just waiting for the information from the lab to confirm that 𝐻𝐸 was our suspect. We got the call stating that he was not our man. When you receive information that positively eliminates the person that you believed was responsible, it means you're back to the beginning and starting all over again.
After 20 months of non-stop investigation, hundreds of DNA tests, interviews, and man-hours, detectives reluctantly admit their hunt for Jamie Wheeler's killer has gone cold.
At this point in time, the police needed a break, and they were about to get one.
A random home invasion holds the key that will finally unlock the mystery of Jamie Wheeler's bloody murder. Detective Neil Wiley has spent nearly 2 years hunting the man who killed 20-year-old Jamie Wheeler. But with all leads exhausted, his case has gone cold.
You hate to say it as defeat, but at the same point in time, everybody is kind of just exasperated that they went through all this work to come up with a negative result.
Well, there was times when we were wondering if they're ever going to catch him. Any conversations I had with the Saskatoon City Police, they were still doing a lot of investigating, a lot of interviews. But as far as I knew, there was no definite suspect.
It went on so long, it felt like that they would never catch who did this. You're always wondering, because they said it was somebody she knew, so you're always wondering, is it a friend? Is it a family member? Who did this? You're kind of always looking and watching your back.
Then, one cold Saskatoon morning, a year and 10 months after Jamie's death, officers respond to a call about a home invasion a couple of miles from Jamie's apartment in the suburban east side of town.
Police arrived at the scene and immediately noted that the victim had a cut on her hand. Otherwise, she was uninjured and able to tell the police what had happened to her. Also in the apartment was her daughter and the daughter's boyfriend. At the time, her daughter was 8 months pregnant. All were sleeping. Early in the morning, when about 7 o'clock, the victim heard a noise. She then started to get out of her bed, and as she approached her bedroom door, a male came through her door holding a knife. He initially demanded that she place her hands together, and he had a roll of duct tape with him. At one point, she reached out for the hand that was holding the knife, and as a result, that's how the injury occurred.
Her assailant tries again to tie her up, preparing to savagely assault her, but she isn't going down without a fight.
At some point, he finally seemed to acknowledge that there were other people present in the apartment. And at that point, the male individual said, "You didn't see me, I'm not here, I'm out of here."
In the freshly fallen snow, his tracks aren't hard to find.
So they followed the footprints leading from the patio door, and it led away from the complex. I think it went through like a little shopping area, and it went into a cul-de-sac.
The prints led up a driveway at a particular residence. That driveway was partially covered with snow, so the tracks led up the driveway, and then there was a bare concrete area, and then the police noticed the tracks seeming to come down back into the snow area.
That's what accused often do when they're trying to get away, is they might go and hide or bed down, as the police call it. So, you know, they might go up to somebody's house, wait, look and see if anybody's around, and then return back down.
And so they continued to follow those tracks, which led back around in a circular route to the other end of the apartment building.
Given the building's security features, investigators wonder if their assailant is a resident or knows someone who is. A search of the area yields another significant clue.
In looking further at the apartment complex, officers noted that the tracks led to a dumpster. The police found inside that dumpster duct tape. On that duct tape, they noted apparent bloodstains.
And they also have a solid witness.
Because the victim in the apartment complex got a good look at the perpetrator in that case, she got together with the police and a sketch artist, and a composite drawing was created that they gave out to the public in the hopes that maybe the public could identify this person.
All patrol members of the Saskatoon Police were given the composite drawing and were advised to look for a suspect that looked similar to this, especially in the area where the attack had taken place.
And this is not the first sexual attack in this apartment complex.
Saskatoon Police have been circulating this composite sketch. It was hoped to identify a man responsible for at least 2 vicious sexual assaults at an apartment building on Stillwater Drive.
People immediately thought, is there a sexual predator out there? There were other attacks. There were apartments broken into, women assaulted, and there was much alarm across the city and in the particular neighborhoods where it happened.
Then investigators get a startling and completely unexpected break.
A day after the 2nd anniversary of Jamie's homicide, I was working that day and I received a phone call from the lab.
The DNA on the duct tape from the apartment assault matches Sergeant Wiley's unknown male 1. Which means the man in the composite drawing is almost certainly Jamie Wheeler's killer.
We didn't have a name associated to that DNA profile, but it was a lead that could take us to the individual that was responsible for killing Jamie.
Officers go back to the apartment building where the assault had taken place for more questioning.
Several residents reported that one person living within the apartment complex had been acting suspicious. He was watching them, staring at them, and people felt uneasy when he was doing this. An interesting twist came up in the case, and they find that he lives with a woman that had once lived in a small cul-de-sac very close to the apartment, which was associated to the previous sexual assault.
The very house where police thought the assailant had been hiding on the night of the sexual assault.
Hey, Neil. Come here for a second.
When they're doing follow-up on this woman, they establish that she had a brother by the name of Dominick McCullock that lived at that address. Now, the interesting point about the whole case was 𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 told investigators in 2001 that he had a previous contact with a young fella with the last name McCullock.
Investigators find out from the sister that Dominick has only recently moved from the previous address. The police now consider a different explanation for the strange pattern of snowy footprints.
When the police first followed the tracks, they believed that the perpetrator had been at the apartment complex, went into the residential area to hide, and returned to the apartment complex.
Now investigators were starting to think, no, they started at that address, went to the apartment, and then returned back to that address.
Investigators ask their old friend Dave Perron if he knows their latest suspect. This time, they hit pay dirt.
Oh, Dominick, me and him go way back.
Dominick McCullock had been a friend of his. They went to high school together, and Mr. McCullock had been on a number of occasions at the residence.
Dominick had been to the residence several times to buy marijuana or use marijuana with Dave Perron. He knew Jamie, and it was not uncommon for him to sit down and do marijuana with the 3 of them in the apartment.
Perron insists he hasn't seen or heard from McCullock since the murder. Not once in 2 years. Locating their new suspect and collecting his DNA now becomes top priority.
Hello?
Dominick, hi. Sergeant 𝐂𝐥𝐿𝐈 here. I got a couple questions I want to ask you.
But investigators know that to avoid another cross-country manhunt, they'll have to act fast before this violent predator strikes again.
Goodbye.
After 2 years of hunting Jamie Wheeler's killer, Saskatoon police have now zeroed in on 21-year-old Dominick McCullock. He's a friend and customer of Dave Perron, and he went to rave parties with Dave and Jamie. Investigators know the only way they can prove their suspicions is by matching his DNA to the pubic hair found at the crime scene.
We tried to decide the best way to approach him. We thought, let's just deal with him like we did with every other individual. An investigator was chosen to make that call. He phoned. Mr. McCullock was given the opportunity to come down, be interviewed, provide a sample, and he declined.
In the west side of the city, plainclothes officers get a visual on their suspect.
He was operating a motor vehicle on a main street in Saskatoon, smoking a cigarette. At one point, the officers noticed the cigarette come flying out of the driver's window.
Oh, he dropped a butt. He dropped a butt.
Police stopped middle of this busy street, having to frantically get out, find this cigarette butt, and take it off to the lab.
We contacted the lab. We told them that we had a potential suspect and the individual was responsible for the homicide and the sexual assaults. And we asked them to process that sample as quickly as possible.
On November 29th, 2002, the results are in.
Yeah, Sergeant 𝐂𝐿𝐈.
We had a very dedicated lab team, and we had one individual that worked with us through 207 samples.
After 2.5 years, they finally hear the words they've been waiting to hear.
She called and she said, "We got him." She was ecstatic, we were ecstatic, and she was excited as we were that we had found the individual that was our unknown male profile.
That day I was at home, the phone rang. It was Sergeant 𝐂𝐿𝐈 from the Saskatoon City Police informing me that they would be making an arrest concerning Jamie's case. Actually, I was asked by Sergeant 𝐂𝐿𝐈 to keep it to myself until the arrest was made. I felt pretty relieved about it, hoping now we'll get some answers as to why and who killed Jamie.
An arrest warrant was issued for the arrest of Dominick McCullock. The police had discovered that he was residing in Sylvan Lake, Alberta, and the Saskatoon Police Service asked the RCMP in Alberta for their assistance, and Mr. McCullock was arrested there. Saskatoon police attended to Sylvan Lake, Alberta, and transported him back to Saskatoon, where he was formally charged with the second-degree murder of Jamie Wheeler. We simply used the cigarette butt to obtain the warrant to get a bodily sample right directly from Mr. McCullock. That evidence is much stronger because, of course, the officer can testify that the sample came directly from the body of Dominick McCullock. The results came back as a match to the unknown male one.
With their suspect behind bars, authorities sweep through McCulloch's apartment in Alberta. In the back of his closet, they find a telephone identical to the one ripped out of the wall at Jamie and Dave's apartment 2 years ago. They also find a notebook, which ties him to 2 previous sexual assaults.
In the notebook, there was some drawings. These drawings were done previously, but they were degrading to women. Some of them showed violence towards women, and we believe that he was responsible for making these drawings.
There was clearly a sexual component in the 2 apartment attacks. In the Jamie Wheeler murder, it's my theory as a prosecutor that it was most likely a sexual component involved in that attack. although the Crown could never prove that, and no evidence could be placed before the jury.
Investigators work out a new theory of what they think happened on the night of Jamie's murder.
So it's our theory Mr. McCullock went to Mr. Perront's residence that night to either buy drugs from Mr. Perront or perhaps indulge in drugs with Mr. Perront, and there found Jamie Wheeler alone. Miss Wheeler would have let Mr. McCullock into the suite because he was known to her. It's then our theory that obviously something went wrong, and Mr. McCullock attacked Jamie Wheeler.
McCulloch's murder trial begins on April 26, 2004, with all of Canada watching.
Jamie's mom, my sister, had called me and said to me, I'd like to have buttons before we attend the preliminary hearing. She said, I want something small, just with a picture of Jamie, that maybe the date of her birth and her death, and something that we can wear to show that we cared.
The meaning of the pins to me was just to let the people who was either attending the trial or the judge himself, everybody involved, just to know that Jamie was a person, that this person had no right to do what he did to her, and she has rights too. I wore mine throughout all trials, and from that day on, I've always worn it.
When I did receive this button, I did in fact wear it throughout the trial, of course, hidden sort of in the inside of my vest. And of course, prosecutors aren't supposed to get personally involved in cases, but to a certain degree, I got at least that personally involved.
17 days later, the jury finds Dominick McCullock guilty as charged. The 22-year-old is given a life sentence.
Dominick McCullock ultimately pled guilty to the apartment attack that occurred in January 2002. He also at that time pled guilty to another apartment attack that had occurred 2 years earlier in January of 2000.
At the end, when the guilty plea came in, it was a very satisfied feeling. Everybody had put in over 2 years on this case, day in and day out, and to see the result that we got the person that was responsible was very satisfying and gratifying.
It was a relief that he was finally found and convicted. At least another family doesn't have to go through what we had to go through. But still what remains is Jamie's gone forever. Family events have all changed. She's got niece and nephews that never meet her. I wanted answers as to why he did it. Like, why would he attack Jamie and kill her by knowing her?